I had always trusted Lisa. In the 12 years we had been together, she had never given me a reason to doubt her. We built a life together, something solid, something real, or at least I thought so. But lately something had shifted, a subtle change, almost too small to notice at first. A missed glance here, a late night there, small, insignificant details that seemed harmless on their own. But when you put them together, a different picture started to emerge. It began with the little things. She started dressing differently, more stylish, more expensive, more revealing. I remember when she came home with a new dress, sleek and low cut, far more daring than anything she'd worn before. She laughed it off when I commented on it, saying it was a treat for herself. She deserved it after all. She'd been working hard, spending longer hours at the gym where she worked as a personal trainer. Her explanation made sense, but something gnawed at me, an itch I couldn't scratch. The excuses started to pile up. "I'm working late again," she'd say, her eyes flickering toward her phone, her lips pressing into a tight smile. She had a new client, someone important, someone who required extra attention. "He's really intense," she said one night, and I remember how her voice carried a strange edge when she spoke about him. I tried to ignore the feeling that was creeping into my mind. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. We had always shared everything, our thoughts, our dreams, our fears. That's what made us work as a couple, or so I thought. But she started to retreat, pulling away from me emotionally. The way she looked at me, as if I was just a figure in the background, a prop in her life. I could feel the distance growing between us, yet I said nothing. I convinced myself it was just a phase, that things would go back to normal. But they didn't. One evening, I found myself sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at the clock on the wall, waiting for her to come home. It was well past midnight when she finally walked in. She didn't even seem to notice me sitting there, didn't offer an apology or an excuse, just a quick nod and a yawn before heading straight to bed. As I listened to her footsteps fade, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just a phase. The doubts began to bloom, feeding off every small, unexplainable detail. The new clothes, the late nights, the secretive glances at her phone. My mind raced, flipping through 1,000 different scenarios, each one worse than the last. Was she seeing someone? Was there someone else who made her laugh the way she used to laugh with me? I tried to push the thoughts away, but they stuck, clinging to me like a stain I couldn't wash off. I wanted to confront her, but what would I even say? That I had a gut feeling? That I thought her wardrobe choices suddenly meant she was cheating? No, I couldn't accuse her without proof. I wouldn't risk blowing up my marriage over nothing, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I kept quiet, trying to observe without being too obvious. Every glance at her phone now seemed suspicious. Every smile she gave felt distant. There was a moment a week later when I was sure I'd lost her completely. She sat across from me at dinner, her eyes fixed on her plate, barely speaking. It was as if I wasn't even there. She was physically present, but emotionally gone, like a ghost of the woman I married. I knew something was wrong. There was no denying it anymore. But what? I replayed every conversation we'd had, every moment we spent together in the last few months, trying to pinpoint where things started to change. The gym, it always came back to the gym, her long hours, her new client. I'd never seen this person, never heard anything about them except for the vague description she offered when I asked. I didn't push her. I didn't want to seem paranoid. But the doubts were turning into something more solid, something I couldn't ignore. The final straw came one Friday evening. She had just left for the gym, her bag slung over her shoulder, when I noticed her laptop still open on the kitchen counter. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it, but something in me, some deep instinct, told me to check. I walked over, feeling my heart rate pick up as I stared at the screen. Her email was open, and at the top of the inbox, an unread message caught my eye. The subject line was simple: "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." I knew I shouldn't have clicked on it. I knew that whatever I found would change everything, but I clicked it anyway. The email was short. A few lines exchanged between her and someone named Mark. The words blurred as I read them, my mind struggling to process the meaning behind them. Looking forward to our time together. You always know how to make me feel good. I felt the floor shift beneath me, my stomach tightening into knots. The words echoed in my head. You always know how to make me feel good. What the hell did that mean? I scrolled down, reading through the chain of messages, piecing together their conversations. It wasn't hard to figure out. The man she was writing to wasn't just her client. He was someone else, someone who had been with her, someone who had shared moments with her that should have been mine. I slammed the laptop shut, the sound of it hitting the counter ricocheting through the quiet kitchen. My hands were shaking, my chest tight with anger, betrayal, humiliation. It was real. It wasn't just in my head. She was seeing someone else. I felt my entire world crumbling around me. The life we had built, the trust, the love, it was all a lie. Every memory I cherished felt tainted, twisted by this revelation. I wanted to scream, to break something, but I forced myself to stay calm. Exploding now wouldn't fix anything. For hours, I sat in that chair, staring at the laptop, replaying every moment in my head. How long had this been going on? How could I have missed it? What had I done wrong? The questions swirled around me, but no answers came. All I knew was that the woman I thought I knew, the woman I loved, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. When Lisa came home later that night, I didn't say a word. I watched her move around the house, so casual, so unaffected, as if nothing had changed. As if she hadn't just torn my heart out and left it bleeding on the kitchen floor. But something had changed. I had changed. I couldn't confront her, not yet. Not until I knew what I wanted to do, how I wanted to play this. My mind was racing, plotting, thinking of every possible outcome. I wasn't going to lose everything because of her. No, she was going to regret this. She was going to regret ever thinking she could betray me and walk away with half of everything we built. I wasn't just going to sit back and let her destroy me. I was going to take control. The next few days felt like I was living in someone else's skin. I went through the motions of life, work, meals, the usual small talk with Lisa, while every muscle in my body burned with anger, disbelief, and pain. I watched her closely, trying to see if she would slip, say something that would confirm what I already knew. But she was calm, composed, as if nothing had changed, as if the woman who had sent those emails to another man didn't exist. It was maddening. I could barely sleep, my mind constantly replaying every interaction we'd had over the last few months, looking for the moment when she started lying to me. Was it when she first met him? Had she been planning this for weeks, months? I didn't know how long it had been going on, but it didn't matter. The betrayal was there, etched into the fabric of our lives, poisoning every shared memory I clung to. I needed more. More than the emails, more than the subtle changes in her behavior. I needed undeniable proof. I couldn't just accuse her with only vague evidence. I needed something concrete, something she couldn't deny or spin back on me. I started thinking of how to get it, how to catch her in the act without her knowing I was on to her. My first step was to check her phone. One night when she was in the shower, I grabbed it from the kitchen counter and unlocked it. The familiar screen blinked to life, but it didn't take long to realize that she'd deleted the messages. There was nothing. No calls, no texts from Mark, nothing that linked her to him at all. It was as if she knew I might check. I gripped the phone tightly, a surge of anger shooting through me. Of course, she would cover her tracks. I tossed it back down, making sure everything looked untouched. I would need to be smarter than that. I had to dig deeper, stay patient. Over the next few days, I began gathering what I could. I searched through our shared files on her laptop again, but there was nothing new. Just those few emails I had already seen. She was careful, methodical in hiding her tracks. I needed to find a way to expose her, but my options were limited. I started paying attention to the time she left the house, especially for the gym. That place, I was certain, was where she was seeing him. I thought of following her, but I couldn't risk being too obvious. She'd notice if I was suddenly interested in her schedule. Then one night she mentioned her late client again. The way she said it, so casually, so confidently, as if she believed I was still oblivious. It made my blood boil, but I kept my face neutral, forcing a smile as I nodded. You must be exhausted, I said, my voice calm even though my insides were screaming. Yeah, she replied with a sigh, leaning back on the couch. He's just a little more demanding than most, but it's nothing I can't handle. I bet. That night I made my move. I couldn't confront her directly. Not yet. I needed to know what I was up against. While she was asleep, I crept into the living room and accessed her email again, this time searching for any traces I might have missed. My eyes flicked through the inbox, the drafts, sent messages, nothing. But then I found it, a folder named Trips. Curiosity took over and I clicked it open. There it was, all the proof I needed. A series of emails, conversations, and itineraries all between her and Mark. They were planning a weekend away. No, not just any weekend, a romantic getaway to a cabin 2 hours outside the city. A trip that coincided with the weekend I had told her I'd be out of town for a work conference. I read through the details, every word like a stab to the gut. They were planning everything from the drive up to the wine they would bring. There was no ambiguity now. This wasn't just an affair. She was building a whole separate life with this man, a life that didn't include me. I sat back in the chair, staring at the screen, my mind whirling. I could confront her now. I could wake her up and throw the laptop in her face, demand an explanation, watch her squirm as she tried to justify this betrayal. But I didn't. That wouldn't be enough. I wanted her to feel the full weight of what she'd done. I wanted her to realize just how much she'd lost before I made my move. I closed the laptop carefully, my hands shaking. This wasn't going to be a clean break. This was going to be war. In the days that followed, I began piecing together my next steps. I hired a private investigator, an old friend from college who owed me a favor. I needed eyes on her when I couldn't be there. I needed to know when she saw him, where they went, how long it had been going on. I needed every sordid detail, not just for myself, but for the moment when I would reveal everything to her. I continued to act normally, smiling when she came home, asking her about her day, pretending I didn't know that everything she said was a lie. The investigator kept me updated. Photos, timestamps, everything I needed to confirm what I had already found. The more information I got, the more I felt in control. This wasn't just a betrayal anymore. This was strategy. Lisa's behavior didn't change. She went to the gym, came home late, showered and crawled into bed beside me as if she hadn't just been with someone else. The investigators' reports detailed each encounter with Mark. They met at a coffee shop not far from our house, and from there they'd disappear for hours. She didn't even bother to hide it anymore. One night I watched her from across the table as we ate dinner. She was talking about her day, something about a new client who wanted her to help him train for a marathon. I smiled, nodding along as she spoke, but inside I was seething. I already knew she hadn't been with any clients that afternoon. She'd been with him. I thought about confronting her right there. My mind raced with the idea of flipping the table, throwing every lie she'd told me back in her face. But I held back. The time wasn't right. Not yet. The weekend trip was coming up. She'd been careful not to mention it to me directly, but I'd seen the packing list she'd stashed in her closet. It was happening. I knew it, and she had no idea that I was already 2 steps ahead. The night before she was supposed to leave, I watched her pack. She didn't bother to tell me why she was filling her suitcase or where she was going, assuming I was too wrapped up in my own life to care. I let her think that. I watched her from the doorway of our bedroom, her back to me as she folded clothes and zipped up the bag. "Big weekend plans?" I asked, keeping my voice light. She glanced over her shoulder, smiling faintly. "Yeah, just a little getaway with the girls." The lie slid so easily off her tongue that I almost laughed. She didn't even flinch. "Sounds fun." "You deserve it," I replied, forcing the words out through clenched teeth. She turned back to her suitcase, clearly relieved that I hadn't pressed for more details. My stomach churned with disgust. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I'd built a life with, was a stranger now. Later that night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Tomorrow she would be with him. Tomorrow she would think she had gotten away with it all. But tomorrow everything would change. I had all the proof I needed. I had been patient. and now it was time to act. The next morning, I kissed her goodbye as she left for her weekend with the girls, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. The anger, the betrayal, the hurt, it was all still there, but now it was controlled, focused. I wasn't going to let her destroy me. I was going to be the one to bring her world crashing down. As I watched her drive away, a plan fully formed in my mind, I realized that this was the moment I had been waiting for. She had no idea what was coming, but soon enough she would. The moment her car disappeared around the corner, I felt the final piece of control click into place. There was no more doubt. I had what I needed, and now it was time to execute my plan, piece by calculated piece. I wasn't going to let her win, not in the way she thought she would. Lisa had no idea the level of destruction I was about to unleash, and that made it all the sweeter. First, I called my lawyer, Malcolm. I had retained him weeks ago, just after the private investigator gave me the first set of evidence. He was sharp, discreet, and didn't ask unnecessary questions. That's why I chose him. We had already set things in motion, laying the groundwork for my eventual exit from this nightmare of a marriage. Now it was time to accelerate the timeline. "Brian, is it time?" Malcolm asked as soon as I mentioned her weekend trip. "It's time," I confirmed, my voice steady despite the rage simmering beneath my words. "Let's move forward with the asset transfer." Malcolm didn't need further explanation. We had already discussed the plan in detail. Over the past few weeks, I had been gradually liquidating my personal assets and moving funds into a series of charitable accounts I had set up under a family foundation. The accounts were airtight, donations that couldn't be reversed and were set to benefit causes that, to anyone else, would appear perfectly noble. Lisa couldn't touch a dime of it. The idea of her standing in front of a judge, expecting half of our money, only to be told it was all gone, gave me a dark sense of satisfaction. She'd have nothing but her debt and her shame. Next, I transferred the remainder of the funds from our joint account. It wasn't a large sum. We had already invested most of our savings over the years, but what was left would still make a difference in my plan. I made a payment on the mortgage for the next 2 months, then transferred the remaining balance into the same charity account. By the time Lisa realized what was happening, the money would be long gone, buried under paperwork she'd never be able to access. With that part in motion, I turned my attention to the next phase, the legal groundwork. Malcolm had already prepared the divorce papers, which I would serve her as soon as she returned from her weekend getaway. I smiled, imagining the shock on her face when she realized that I had been planning this all along, that I hadn't been the clueless, trusting husband she thought she was fooling. As I scrolled through the final draft of the divorce papers on my laptop, I noticed the clause we had added about the DNA tests. It was one of the more painful aspects of the plan, but it was necessary. I had long suspected that at least one of the kids might not be mine, especially given the timing of Lisa's first pregnancy. But now, with her affair fully confirmed, I couldn't ignore the possibility that both of our children might belong to someone else. The thought sickened me, but it was fuel for the fire. I needed the truth, even if it destroyed what was left of my family in the process. I reached out to the DNA testing service Malcolm had recommended. The kits had been sitting in my office drawer for a week now, waiting for this moment. With careful precision, I collected samples from the kids' toothbrushes, making sure I followed the instructions exactly. They were at school, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt for what they would eventually have to face. But this wasn't about them. It was about Lisa. She was the one who had created this mess, and she would be the one to face the consequences. I sealed the samples in the prepaid envelopes and dropped them off at a FedEx box. Once the results were in, they would be the final nail in the coffin. If the children weren't mine, there would be no child support, no further ties. I would sever everything, leaving Lisa alone with nothing but the ruins of her life. Later that afternoon, as I sat in my office, I received a text from the private investigator. It was a photo, time-stamped and clear as day. Lisa and Mark, standing outside the cabin she had lied about. Their faces were close, their bodies pressed together as if the world around them didn't exist. My stomach twisted in disgust, but I forced myself to look at it. I needed this image burned into my mind as a reminder of why I was doing this. They had no idea I was watching, no idea their cozy little weekend was nothing more than the prelude to the trap closing around them. I forwarded the photo to Malcolm with a single message. "We'll use this when we serve her the papers." He responded almost immediately, confirming that he would file them on Monday morning, ensuring they were ready to hit her the moment she returned. By the time she walked through our front door, everything would already be set in motion. As the weekend passed, I occupied my time with meticulous preparation. I filed documents, finalized payments, and even began sorting through personal items in the house. I had no intention of staying here much longer. Once the divorce was finalized and the financial damage was done, I would be gone. I had already found a small place in a coastal town far enough away from New York to disappear, but close enough that I could rebuild my life in peace. I kept myself busy, but the anger never left. Every time I saw a picture of Lisa in our home, I wanted to rip it off the wall and throw it in the trash. Every reminder of the life we had built together felt like a lie, a carefully constructed illusion she had shattered. But I didn't let the anger control me. I couldn't afford to be reckless. This was about precision, about making sure every piece fell exactly where I wanted it to. Sunday evening arrived, and with it Lisa. She came through the door, bags in hand, a content smile playing on her lips as if she had just returned from a perfectly innocent trip. My stomach turned as I watched her move around the house, so effortlessly lying with her every breath. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I wanted her to have one last night in the comfort of her delusions before everything came crashing down. We ate dinner in near silence, the tension between us palpable. She didn't seem to notice, though, her mind likely still lingering on her weekend with Mark. I wondered how long she thought she could keep this up. Did she believe she could juggle both lives forever, lying to my face every day while sneaking around behind my back? Tomorrow she would find out just how wrong she was. That night as we lay in bed, I barely slept. My mind raced with thoughts of the confrontation to come. I knew she would try to deny everything at first, lie, twist the truth, maybe even cry to gain my sympathy. But I wouldn't fall for it. I would present the facts one by one, starting with the photos, the emails, the bank accounts drained of every penny she thought she could claim. And when she tried to recover with the prospect of child support, I would hand her the DNA test results. That was when the real devastation would hit. The morning came slowly, the anticipation clawing at my insides as I prepared for what was to come. Lisa got ready for her day, moving around the house without a care in the world. I waited until she was about to leave for work before I made my move. "Lisa," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet of the morning. She paused, turning to look at me with a casual smile. It would be the last time she wore that smile. "Yeah?" she asked, her tone light, as if everything was still normal. "I think you should sit down." Confusion crossed her face, but she obeyed, sitting down on the edge of the couch as I stood over her, the divorce papers in my hand. I held them out to her without a word, watching as her eyes scanned the first page, her expression slowly morphing from confusion to disbelief. "Brian, what is this?" Her voice wavered, but I didn't answer. I handed her the photo next, the one of her and Mark outside the cabin. Her face paled as she stared at it, her mouth opening and closing as if she couldn't find the words. "I know everything," I said, my voice steady. "I've known for weeks, and now I'm done. You can have Mark, but you'll have nothing else." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. This was just the beginning. Tomorrow we'd be in court. Tomorrow she'd see what real betrayal felt like. The next morning, as expected, Lisa sat across from me at the kitchen table, her eyes still red from the confrontation the day before. She hadn't slept. I could hear her pacing in the guest room all night, but I had stayed in our bed, calm and resolute. There was no point in dragging out the drama. I knew where this was going, and so did she. We arrived at the courthouse in silence. She hadn't said a word since I handed her the papers, and that was fine with me. There wasn't much left to say. I could see the anger in her eyes now, replacing the confusion and guilt from the night before. I knew she was gearing up for a fight, thinking she could still somehow salvage something from this mess, maybe guilt me into giving her more than she deserved. But I had anticipated every possible move she might make. The courthouse was busy with the hum of lawyers and litigants, the kind of ambient noise that fades into the background but hangs heavy in the air. My lawyer, Malcolm, was already there, looking calm and collected as always. He gave me a nod when he saw us approaching. Lisa's lawyer, a younger guy named Preston, was already flipping through files, no doubt trying to find some loophole he could exploit. There wouldn't be any. We sat in silence, waiting for our case to be called. I could feel Lisa's eyes on me, but I didn't return her gaze. Let her stew. Let her wonder what was coming next. Brian Daniels versus Lisa Daniels, the clerk called, and we both stood. The judge, a stern-looking man in his 50s, gestured for us to approach. I could feel the tension crackling between Lisa and me, but I remained calm, focused. Everything was about to fall into place. Your Honor, my client has been informed of the proceedings and we are ready to move forward, Malcolm said, as he handed over a series of documents to the judge. I watched Lisa's expression tighten as she caught sight of the thick stack of papers. She still didn't know the full extent of what I had done. Not yet. The judge flipped through the documents, nodding slowly. I see, he said, glancing between us. It seems this divorce includes some complex financial matters. Correct, Your Honor, Malcolm replied smoothly. My client has already moved the majority of his assets into a charitable foundation, and as per the documentation, those funds are no longer available for division. Lisa's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with disbelief. What? She whispered under her breath, but the judge's voice drowned out her shock. Is this correct, Mr. Daniels? The judge asked, his sharp gaze falling on me. Yes, Your Honor, I said, my voice steady. The funds were legally transferred. My wife will find that our joint accounts have been settled, but there is no remaining balance to divide. I could see Lisa struggling to contain herself, her fists clenching in her lap as the reality of the situation hit her. She had walked into this thinking she could take half of everything, my money, my future, but I had planned too well for that. Every dollar was accounted for, legally untouchable. Lisa's lawyer, clearly blindsided, scrambled to regain his composure. Your Honor, surely there must be some consideration for my client. Mrs. Daniels has been an integral part of Mr. Daniels' life, and she has rights to these assets. Not if the assets no longer exist, the judge interrupted, his tone flat. The foundation appears to be in good standing, and the funds have been lawfully transferred. I didn't look at Lisa, but I could feel the fury radiating from her. Her perfect little plan was crumbling right in front of her, and there was nothing she could do about it. But the best part was yet to come. As for child support, Malcolm continued, sliding another set of documents across the judge's bench. My client would like to present the results of a day test. The air seemed to thicken, the courtroom going silent as everyone turned their attention to the paperwork Malcolm had just handed over. I finally glanced at Lisa, and the look on her face was worth every sleepless night, every moment of doubt I'd suffered. I'd suffered. She had no idea what was coming. What is this? Lisa muttered, her voice low and shaky. The judge didn't waste time. He flipped through the DNA results, his brow furrowing slightly as he read. It appears that Mr. Daniels is not the biological father of the children in question. Lisa's mouth dropped open, a strangled sound escaping her throat. That's impossible. He's their father. Her voice broke as she tried to wrap her mind around what was happening. He's always been their father. I let her words hang in the air for a moment, then turned to her, my gaze cold. I raised them, I love them, but they're not mine, Lisa. And now, thanks to the test, we both know that. The judge cleared his throat, turning back to Lisa's lawyer. Given the DNA results, Mr. Daniels is not obligated to pay child support for children who are not biologically his. As for any claims to financial support, those will need to be reconsidered in light of the fact that Mrs. Daniels does not have a right to the assets in question. The room spun around Lisa as if everything she thought she controlled was slipping through her fingers. I watched as her lawyer whispered frantically in her ear, trying to calm her, but the damage was done. She was sinking, and I wasn't going to throw her a lifeline. This can't be happening, she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. But it was. It was happening exactly as I had planned. The judge leaned forward, his eyes hard. Mrs. Daniels, do you wish to contest the results of the Ney test or the transfer of assets? Lisa opened her mouth, then closed it, her face pale and stricken. I could see her trying to find a way out, trying to grasp at some last thread of control, but there was none. She was trapped, and she knew it. She faltered, her voice cracking. I don't know. Your Honor, if I may, Malcolm said smoothly. We believe the evidence is clear, and we request that the court finalize the dissolution of the marriage with no further claims on my client's assets or income. The judge nodded, already scribbling something down in his notes. Given the documentation and the DNA results, I see no reason to delay this case further. The divorce is granted, and Mrs. Daniels will receive no financial support from Mr. Daniels. This court is adjourned. The sound of the gavel hitting the wood was like music to my ears. It was done. I stood slowly, feeling an odd sense of calm wash over me. It was over. Lisa remained seated, staring blankly at the table, as if she couldn't believe what had just happened. I didn't wait for her to process it. I turned and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. The sunlight outside was blinding, but it felt like a release, a final breath of fresh air after being submerged for too long. I had done what I came to do. Lisa was left with nothing, no money, no support, and no family. She had lost everything, and it was all her own fault. As I walked down the courthouse steps, Malcolm fell into step beside me. Well, that went as expected, he said, a slight smirk on his face. You're free, Brian. It's done. I nodded, but there was no satisfaction in the moment, just a deep, hollow sense of finality. I had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the end of something much larger than just a marriage. Thanks, Malcolm, I said, my voice quiet. He patted me on the back. Take care of yourself, Brian. You've earned it. As he walked away, I stood there for a moment, watching the cars go by, the people walking along the street. I had burned everything to the ground, and now all that was left was the ashes. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for the moving company. It was time to finalize the sale of the house and disappear from Lisa's world for good. There was nothing left for me here. No reason to stay. I didn't look back as I walked toward my car. The next chapter of my life had already begun, and Lisa was nothing but a distant memory. After the divorce was finalized, I thought that would be it. The end of the story. But something still lingered. A bitterness, a feeling of incompleteness that gnawed at me in the quiet hours. It wasn't enough that Lisa had been left with nothing. She still had her illusions, her lies, the way she could twist the truth in her mind to make herself the victim. I knew she would spin this, her downfall, as someone else's fault. She'd play the sympathy card, turn to friends, and probably find a way to land on her feet. That wasn't part of my plan. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she had done. I wanted her to fully realize the depth of her betrayal, not just in the court's eyes, but in her own. She had to face me, face everything she had tried to sweep under the rug. This wasn't just about financial ruin or public humiliation. It was about breaking her facade. I gave her a few days after the court hearing. Let her stew in her new reality. Let her scramble to piece together the wreckage of her life. Then I reached out. I called her. Brian? Her voice cracked as she answered. She hadn't expected me to call. What do you want? I kept my tone neutral, detached. We need to talk. There was a long pause. I could almost hear her mind racing, trying to figure out why I would be reaching out now after everything. Finally, she spoke, her voice laced with bitterness. About what? You got what you wanted. You've destroyed me. What else is there to say? Not over the phone, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Meet me at the house tomorrow, noon. Why should I? Because, I cut her off, my tone sharp. There are still things left unsaid, and I'm not going to let you hide from this. Silence. Then a quiet, resigned sigh. Fine. The next day I arrived at the house, the same house we had shared for years, the one I was about to sell and leave behind forever. It felt empty now, stripped of the warmth and familiarity it once held. The memories were tainted, every room stained with the knowledge of her betrayal. I sat at the kitchen table, waiting. Noon came and went, but I wasn't surprised. Lisa had always been one for dramatics, for making an entrance on her own terms. 20 minutes later, I heard the front door creak open. She walked in, looking disheveled, her face pale and drawn. Gone was the confident, composed woman who had once believed she could control everything. Now she just looked tired, defeated. But I wasn't here to feel sorry for her. Brian, she started, her voice soft, almost pleading. I don't know what else you want from me. You've taken everything. I motioned for her to sit. I want you to understand what you've done. Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of anger replacing the exhaustion. I already do. No, you don't, I said, leaning forward, my voice low but firm. You think you're the victim? You think this is just some cruel twist of fate that landed on your doorstep. But this, I gestured around the room, this is all because of you, your choices, your lies. Her mouth opened as if to argue, but I didn't give her the chance. I loved you, I continued, my voice tightening. I trusted you. I gave you everything, Lisa. But you threw it away. You threw us away. For what? For him? For some cheap thrill with someone who ran the moment he realized there was nothing left to take? She flinched at that. Good. You don't get to play the victim here, I said, my voice growing colder. You don't get to sit there and act like you didn't do this to yourself. You had a choice. You could have come to me. You could have told me the truth, but instead you lied. Every single day you lied. And for what? To keep up this charade? To keep pretending that everything was fine while you built a life behind my back? Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't stop. Do you even understand what you've done to those kids? I asked, my voice sharp now, the anger bubbling to the surface. Do you even care that they're going to grow up knowing their entire lives were built on a lie? That the man they thought was their father isn't? How do you think they'll look at you when they find out the truth? She looked away, her lips trembling. I didn't want this, Brian, she whispered. I didn't mean for it to get this far. You didn't think, I cut her off again. You didn't care about anyone but yourself. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air between us. She sat there staring at the floor, her hands trembling in her lap. You thought you could have it all, I said, my voice quiet but cutting. You thought you could have your affair, your perfect little life, and that I would just be there, ignorant and content, while you ran off to be with him. But now you have nothing, and that's exactly what you deserve. Her head snapped up, her eyes blazing with a mix of anger and desperation. You don't understand, she cried, her voice cracking. You were never there, Brian. You were always so focused on work, on your own life, that you didn't see me. You didn't see how lonely I was, how unhappy. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor as I pushed it back. Don't you dare, I growled, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. Don't you dare try to turn this around on me. She recoiled, her eyes wide with shock, as if she hadn't expected me to react this way. But I wasn't going to let her manipulate the situation. Not anymore. You made your choices, Lisa, I said, my voice cold and steady. And now you're going to live with them. Alone. Her lip trembled, and for a brief moment I saw something break inside her. The defiance, the anger, it all crumbled, leaving only the raw, painful truth. She was alone, and there was nothing she could do to change that. I'm selling the house, I said, turning toward the door. I'll be gone by the end of the week. Don't bother trying to reach me. Her voice was barely a whisper. Where are you going? I paused, my hand resting on the doorframe. Somewhere you'll never find me. And with that, I walked out of the house, leaving Lisa behind in the ruins of the life she had destroyed. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to look back at. As I drove away, the weight of everything lifted from my shoulders. The house, the marriage, the Louise. It was all behind me now. The road stretched out in front of me, open and endless. And for the first time in what felt like years, I could finally breathe. I didn't know where I was going. But I knew one thing for sure. I was free. The coastal town I found was small, quiet, and the perfect place to start over. It wasn't the type of place you'd find on a postcard, but it had a certain charm. Modest, unassuming, with the kind of silence that allowed me to think without interruption. The wind carried the scent of the sea, and the horizon stretched out like a blank page, endless and full of possibility. I rented a small cottage by the shore, far enough from the town center that I wouldn't have to interact with anyone unless I wanted to. That was the point. I didn't want to talk, didn't want to explain my past. I wanted to disappear, at least for a while. I needed time to process everything. The divorce, the lies, the revenge. It had all unraveled so fast, and now that it was over, I was left with an emptiness that surprised me. The days passed slowly, each one blending into the next. I settled into a routine. Morning runs along the beach, afternoons spent reading or walking through the small town, and evenings staring out at the sea. It wasn't a life filled with excitement, but it was peaceful. And after everything, peace was all I wanted. Sometimes I thought about Lisa, how she was probably scrambling to put her life back together. I wondered if she had found out yet that Mark had left her, or if she was still clinging to some hope that things would return to normal. But I didn't dwell on those thoughts for long. I had cut her out of my life completely, and I had no intention of going back. She was just a part of the past now, a painful chapter I had finished. But in those quiet moments and when the wind died down and the world felt still, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. The satisfaction I had expected to feel after the divorce wasn't there. Yes, I had won. I had left her with nothing. But revenge doesn't fill the void left by betrayal. It just masks it, hides it behind a veil of temporary satisfaction. Now that the dust had settled, I was left alone with the reality of what I'd lost. I lost a future I thought I had, the children I believed were mine, and a love that had been built on lies. Lisa had taken all of that from me, but in destroying her, I hadn't found closure. Instead, I had burned everything to the ground, both hers and mine. As the weeks turned into months, I began to rebuild, not in the physical sense, but mentally. The fog that had clouded my mind slowly lifted, and I started to see things more clearly. I realized that I had spent years holding on to something that had been broken for a long time. Lisa's affair was just the final blow. Our marriage had been crumbling well before I ever found out about Mark. I had ignored the signs, buried myself in work, and let the distance between us grow. I wasn't blameless. I had a part in it too. But acknowledging that didn't mean I regretted what I had done. I didn't. The revenge had been necessary, not for closure, but for justice. She had wronged me in ways I couldn't forgive, and what I did was a reckoning. A line drawn in the sand showing her and the world that I wasn't someone to be taken advantage of. Yet, as the bitterness faded, something else emerged. Acceptance. Acceptance that I couldn't change the past, that my life would never be what I thought it would be. But that didn't mean it couldn't be good again. I could rebuild, start fresh, make new choices that weren't clouded by anger and betrayal. One day, as I sat on the porch watching the waves, I realized something had shifted in me. The weight of revenge had lifted. I didn't wake up thinking about Lisa anymore, didn't wonder how she was getting by. It didn't matter. I had moved on, truly moved on, in a way I hadn't thought possible when I left New York. That night, for the first time in what felt like years, I slept deeply. No nightmares, no restless tossing and turning, just peace. The next morning I woke up early, the light just beginning to crest over the horizon. I had a thought that had been creeping up on me for weeks now, but this time it was clear. I needed to do more than just disappear. I needed to build something new, something that was entirely mine, unrelated to my past, to Lisa, to the life I had left behind. I made a decision that morning to stay in the town for good. I had toyed with the idea of leaving, of traveling or moving to another city, but that wasn't what I needed. I needed roots, a new foundation. The small coastal town had grown on me, and I could see myself making a life here. I bought a small property on the edge of town, far enough from the bustle but close enough to not feel completely isolated. It was a fixer-upper, but that was exactly what I wanted, something to occupy my hands, my mind. I started working on it bit by bit, fixing the roof, repainting the walls, tearing down what was broken and building it back up. The physical work mirrored the internal process I was going through. With each wall I tore down, I felt lighter. With each room I painted, I felt like I was reclaiming a part of myself that I had lost during those dark years of my marriage. The house became a symbol of my own rebirth. As the months passed, I started meeting people in the town. Not many, just a few faces at the local diner or on my morning runs. They were kind, curious about the man who had moved in without much explanation. But they didn't pry. I appreciated that. I wasn't ready to share my story, and maybe I never would be. But I was beginning to feel like I belonged, like I had found a place where I could start again. I found myself smiling more, laughing even. It was a strange feeling at first, like I didn't deserve to be happy after everything. But slowly I let go of that guilt. I had paid my dues. I had suffered enough. It was time to let happiness in again, to build a future that wasn't defined by the mistakes of my past. As I stood on the beach one evening, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink, I felt a sense of closure. The horizon stretched out before me, limitless, just like my life now. There were no more chains holding me back, no more lingering bitterness. I had left all of that behind when I drove away from the courthouse months ago. I had survived betrayal. I had exacted my revenge. And now I was free to live my life on my terms in a way that was entirely mine. Looking out at the vast expanse of the sea, I knew that the next chapter of my life would be different. I didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The past had taught me lessons I would carry with me forever, but it no longer defined me. I was stronger now, wiser, and I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next, I would face it with a clear mind and an open heart, because I was free, truly free. And that was the most powerful thing of all.